international community to support and advance the process of Palestinian independent statehood and provide strong support for the implementation of two-state solution and a lasting peace in the Middle East. Regrettably, Palestine's application for full UN membership was mercilessly vetoed by the US in the Security Council on April 18th. On the Palestinian-Israeli issue, the US has repeatedly used veto in an unjustified attempt to obstruct the international community's efforts to correct the historical injustice long visited on Palestine. It is not commensurate with the role of responsible major country. Today, the GA Emergency Special Session adopted by an overwhelming majority a resolution to reaffirm the right of Palestinian people to self-determination, including the right to the independent state of Palestine, determine that the state of Palestine is qualified for membership in the UN, and recommend that the Security Council reconsider favorably its application to join the UN. China welcomes this historic resolution, which reflects the will of the international community. China joined the co-sponsorship of this resolution. China supports the Security Council's early reconsideration of the application of the state of Palestine as mandated by the GA resolution, expects the relevant country to not create further delays or hurdles. President, the resolution adopted today also includes modalities for the state of Palestine's participation in UN activities and relevant meetings, granting it new rights and privileges. We understand that these are the special modalities decided on for the lack of other options as a remedy for the historical injustice long endured by Palestine and a rectification of the US's abusive use of veto. We believe that these special modalities adopted within the limits permitted by the UN Charter will enable the international community to listen more adequately to the voice of Palestine and help it to talk and negotiate with Israel on a relatively equal footing. The resolution makes it clear that these modalities are adopted on exceptional basis and without setting a precedent. We believe that these modalities will not be permanent because one day the state of Palestine will become a full UN member and will enjoy full and equal rights in the UN like other member states. President, the crux of the intractable Palestinian-Israeli issue lies at the stalled implementation of the two-state solution. Over the years, Israel, as the occupying power, has worked ceaselessly to erode the basis of the two-state solution, and the ongoing conflict, already 7 months long, threatens to completely bury the prospect of the two-state solution. China urges Israel to stop collective punishment of the Gaza population, to halt its military offenses on Rafah, and to effectively remove all restrictions on the entry of humanitarian goods into Gaza. In the West Bank, Israel should cease all settlement activities and effectively curb the rising settler violence. China will continue to play a constructive role and make unremitting efforts for the immediate ceasefire, for the revitalization of the two-state solution, for the early realization of peaceful coexistence of Palestine and Israel, and for the lasting peace and stability in the Middle East. Thank you, President.
I thank the distinguished representative of China, and I now invite to the floor the distinguished representative of the state of Qatar.
Mr. President, would like to thank you for reconvening the 10th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly. We align ourselves to the statements presented on behalf of the Arab Group, the OIC, and NAM. Mr. President, the State of Qatar expresses its proudness for the adoption of the historic resolution by the General Assembly today with overwhelming majority. We would like to thank all countries that voted for the resolution. We would like to stress that the participation in the adoption of this resolution exemplifies our strong historic and principled position in support of the brotherly Palestinian people and their just cause. The adoption of this resolution represents an important victory to our brothers, the Palestinians. It also provides the Security Council with another opportunity to take a unified position to recommend the admission of the State of Palestine. This resolution reflects the purposes of the UN and resolutions of international legitimacy, especially the right to self-determination, equality and rights between peoples, and the sovereign equality principle. The admission of the State of Palestine as a full-fledged member is a primary step to achieve the two-state solution, which is a primary entry point to reach a just and comprehensive political solution to the Palestinian cause in line with international legitimacy. Mr. President, despite the importance of what has been achieved today, but the Israeli aggression continues on Gaza in clear defiance of the international law, the international humanitarian law, and the resolutions of the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the ICJ. In this vein, we condemn in the strongest terms the bombardment of the Israeli occupation forces of Rafah and their ground offensive against the crossing point and the threat of forcefully displacing the people from their shelters. We call upon the international community to avoid such ground operation and the committing of a genocide and provide protection to civilians in line with international law and international humanitarian law. We warn that forcing civilians to be displaced from this city, which has become the last resort to hundreds of refugees inside Gaza, is a grave violation of international law. It would exacerbate the humanitarian crisis in the besieged strip. We stress that we will continue our mediation effort with the Arab Republic of Egypt and the USA. We hope that our sincere effort would be fruitful to reach a permanent and immediate ceasefire in Gaza and free all prisoners and detainees and ensure that more humanitarian assistance will reach them constantly. We hope that we'd also provide protection to the civilians. This would pave the way for a serious political process that will lead to a comprehensive settlement of the Palestinian cause. To conclude, Mr. President, we reiterate our historic and principled position in support of the resilience of the Palestinian people and their just cause in line with international legitimacy, in line with the Arab Peace Initiative, which includes Palestinian statehood and independent state along the lines of 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. We reiterate our call to the Security Council to take matters in hand and adopt the right decision to recommend the admission of the State of Palestine as a full-fledged member of the UN. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Qatar, and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
President, dear friends, I would like to thank the United Arab Emirates for tabling this historic resolution, which has been resoundingly endorsed by the members of this General Assembly and by the international community. Let me start by saying that Ireland fully supports this resolution, Ireland co-sponsored this resolution, and Ireland voted in favour of this resolution. 12 years ago, when the General Assembly accorded non-member observer state status to Palestine, an overwhelming majority of states voted in favour. That overwhelming majority of states also made clear their support for full membership of the United Nations for the State of Palestine. And that overwhelming
the will of the international community and contribute to building a true peace in the Middle East based on the two-state solution. It is high time for the international community to reestablish the truth, because the world can no longer ignore this suffering of the Palestinian people that has lasted for decades. It can no longer ignore their right to self-determination and their determination to obtain the status of a full member of the United Nations. President Israel, the occupying power, has perpetrated all sorts of crimes against Palestinian people, scorning international law and international legal resolutions. Israel is convinced that they are above these resolutions and that they enjoy a certain level of immunity. This explains their ongoing hostile and brutal policies and their commission of all sorts of crimes. The most recent month is only one chapter of this decades of suffering. Over the last month alone, barbaric practices by Israel have cost the lives of more than 35,000 Palestinians, the majority women and children. This is through bombing, murders, destruction, the use of famine, and this has led to a unprecedented humanitarian crisis, which is only worsening day by day. Now we are seeing the same practices in the town of Rafah, the last refuge of the Palestinian people, a town which has become densely populated because of the forced displacement of Palestinian people. This is why we need a strong international position to put an end to these Israeli practices in Gaza. President, ladies and gentlemen, the resolution adopted today by a vast majority reflects the conviction of the international community of the rights of the Palestinian people, because beyond the moral duty that this resolution provides for, there is a historic right that we need to honor without delay, because it is an essential part of reviving the peace process and putting an end also to barbaric Israeli practices. This is why we would like to thank all peace-minded nations who voted in favor of the draft resolution. By way of conclusion, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is committed as a founding member of the United Nations, committed to supporting the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to build its own independent state within 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, for a just and comprehensive peace in line with the Arab Peace Initiative and relevant resolutions under international law. Thank you very much, President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our meeting today underscores our commitment to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts through diplomacy. The call to end Israel-Palestine conflict based on a two-state solution also continue to reverberate through this hall. Even the strongest supporter of Israel have called for a two-state solution. It is therefore time for us to walk the talk. If we believe in peace, if we believe in the UN Charter and international law, if we believe in humanity, we must take the brave step to free Palestine, recognize the existence of Palestine, and accept Palestine as a full member of the United Nations. This will allow Palestine to be on an equal footing with Israel in negotiating a two-state solution and bringing lasting peace to the people of Israel and the people of Palestine. The adoption of today's General Assembly resolution shows the readiness of the UN membership to work beyond business as usual, to bring peace, to realize the two-state solution closer to reality. It was also an important step to bring the admission of Palestine as a full member of the United Nations. We must continue to call on the Security Council to take the necessary steps to make this a reality. Mr. President, for 216 days, the people of Gaza have endured brutal Israeli onslaught, resulting in death, destruction, famine, even genocide. For a permanent ceasefire, provide humanitarian assistance at a scale, and continue supporting UNRWA. Mr. President, let today mark a turning point in history, but let it also lead to a stronger path towards Palestinian rightful place in the global community. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brazil.
Mr. President, the day of Palestine's admission to the United Nations as equal among us is finally coming. The resolution adopted today is a meaningful achievement towards full UN membership for the state of Palestine. The determination today by a large majority of the membership that Palestine meets the criteria set out in Article 4 of the Charter and is ready for membership leaves no doubt that the process for Palestinian admission must not linger indefinitely at the Security Council. The General Assembly, the main UN body entrusted with the authority to take the final decision on such matters, must be allowed to exercise its powers under the Charter. A majority of over 2/3 of the votes enabled today's determination. That is the same qualified majority that will manifest itself when the time comes to admit Palestine as a UN member. We are confident that this will happen immediately after the Security Council, as we expect, accepts the recommendation issued by this Assembly today. The recommendation for the Council to reconsider Palestine's request enjoys more than just moral authority and political legitimacy. We recall the 1948 opinion of the International Court of Justice that no member state should be entitled to withhold consent to membership based on political considerations not included among the criteria set out in Article 4, which the Assembly today has determined that Palestine unequivocally fulfills. A politically motivated veto contradicting this Assembly's determination would be unjustifiable. Colleagues, the time has come to fulfill the United Nations promise of a Palestinian state. We can no longer abandon the Palestinians to a fate that is being unilaterally imposed by force by those denying Palestinians their right to self-determination. What we are witnessing in Gaza, now specifically in Rafah, is a shocking reminder of this undeniable reality. Today's resolution, if acted upon by all relevant actors, will pave the way to a future with a viable state of Palestine living side by side with Israel in peace and security within internationally recognized borders, consistent with the relevant United Nations resolutions. As importantly, the admission of Palestine as a member state, to be effected soon, I'm sure, will help restore full trust in the United Nations and in multilateralism. Mr. President, the 10th Emergency Special Session resumed for the 20th time since it was first convened in 1997. It means 27 years of this Assembly's attempting to fill a significant void left by the Security Council in performing its responsibility to address threats to international peace in connection with the situation in the Middle East. For the past 27 years, every time this Assembly convened or reconvened for this emergency session, it has been in response to a blatant failure by the Council to address illegal actions in the occupied state of Palestine. Have we not had enough? Have not the Palestinians suffered enough? Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem are clearly illegal. They alter the demographic composition and status of the Palestinian territory and threaten the prospect of a comprehensive peace settlement in the Middle East. Yet these settlements, which justified our first convening of the 10th Emergency Special Session back in 1997, have continued unabated. And this has only been met with Council inaction, apart from a 2016 resolution that recalls that what we already know: the settlements violate international law. Legal words without action have encouraged further contempt for the law. The occupation lingers on indefinitely, crystallizing a discriminatory system against Palestinians and the annexation of the Palestinian territory. Unlawfulness of actions against Palestinians has become the pervasive reality in the occupied Palestinian territory. The catastrophe in Gaza, whose latest chapter is unfolding in Rafah as we speak, cannot be dissociated from our failure to put an end to this prolonged occupation. It cannot be dissociated from our repeated failure to put an end to violations of international law and ensure compensation for the victims in Palestine. It cannot be dissociated from the United Nations failure to fulfill the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, the same self-determination, statehood, and UN membership that Israelis have enjoyed since 1948. It is clear that the General Assembly's response in the face of Council inaction must go beyond just convening, adjourning, and reconvening the 10th Emergency Special Session. The resolution adopted today should not add to the pile of documents that point to a solution but do little to get us there. Brazil has recognized since 2010 the state of Palestine within the 1967 borders, which includes Gaza, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, with East Jerusalem as its capital. Brazil is hopeful that as a result of today's resolution, which other bodies of the United Nations shall not ignore, the admission of Palestine as a full member of this organization, bound and protected by the UN Charter, will be achieved soon. That will be an important step, with other steps that must seriously follow in the path towards the realization of the two-state solution. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Brazil. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. The situation in Gaza is worsening by the day. Amid the suffering, destruction, spread of disease, and a full-blown famine in the north, the people in Gaza need an immediate ceasefire and humanitarian assistance more than ever. Considering the already catastrophic humanitarian situation, Japan reiterates that a full-scale Israeli military offensive into Rafah must not proceed. In addition, Japan is closely following the developments in East Jerusalem, including the incident regarding the UNRWA headquarters. UNRWA plays an indispensable role in providing relief to refugees, and such destruction of UN facilities is unacceptable. To prevent further tragedy in Gaza, it is imperative that an agreement for a ceasefire and the release of hostages is achieved as soon as possible. In this regard, we strongly support the ongoing effort made by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar. A cessation of hostilities is the only path that could lead to a peaceful way forward. We believe that an immediate and sustainable ceasefire that includes the release of the hostages remain crucial. A few weeks ago, Japan voted in favor of the proposed draft Security Council resolution that would have recommended Palestine's admission as a full UN member, recognizing that Palestine meets the criteria for admission, while also taking into account the perspective of promoting the establishment of the Palestinian state through peaceful negotiations between the parties concerned. Today, Japan also voted in favor of the General Assembly's resolution that grants Palestine additional rights as an observer state, on the understanding that these rights are not inconsistent with the framework of the United Nations Charter. These actions reflect our principled position that upholds Palestine's right to self-determination through the establishment of an independent Palestinian state living side by side in mutual peace and security with Israel. We look forward to seeing Palestine as an observer state play an even more constructive role at the UN. Mr. President, to conclude, we are at a critical juncture, and our next step will be defining moment for the future of the region. Both Israel and Palestine have a right to exist as peaceful and independent states, and Japan remains unwavering in its support for the two-state solution. Let us exert all our efforts towards the realization of an immediate ceasefire so that peace and stability can be seen on the horizon. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Colombia.
Señor Presidente.
President, Colombia underscores the importance of convening this 10th emergency special session of the General Assembly, following the veto by the Security Council on the 18th of April of the Palestinian request to be admitted as a full member of the United Nations. The Charter of the United Nations establishes in its preamble that we, the peoples, are determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which has brought untold sorrow to mankind. With this same end, we commit to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors. However, the intensification of the conflicts globally calls into question the organization's ability to fulfill its fundamental mandate of maintaining international peace and security. In the Middle East, the spiral of atrocities committed since the attack by Hamas on the 7th of October 2023 must cease. This unacceptable escalation of violence has cost over 34,000 lives and over 78,000 injured. Most of these are women and children. It has led to massive displacements of civilians, famine, and the indiscriminate destruction of vital infrastructure. In this regard, Colombia categorically condemns Israel's attack on Rafah, which will have catastrophic consequences for the over 1.4 million people crowded into the city. The magnitude of the tragedy in the Gaza Strip, its irreparable costs for current and future generations, and its harmful implications for stability and peaceful coexistence in the region are beyond words. A resounding international response is imperative. The members of this organization have the collective obligation of demanding an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, for all the parties to comply with their obligations pursuant to international law and international humanitarian law, for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and guarantees of humanitarian access to the area. Moreover, we are faced with the inescapable imperative of guaranteeing a peaceful, definitive, and comprehensive outcome to the question of Palestine, based upon the two-state solution and pursuant to the borders agreed upon by the United Nations in Resolution 242 of 1967. Given that both Palestinians and Israelis have the right to live in peace within secure, internationally recognized borders. Colombia has advocated for the need to carry out a peace conference to resolve the war in Gaza and to resume the route towards negotiations, which would lead to a permanent resolution to the conflict. And in this regard, Colombia reaffirms the support of the government of Gustavo Petro to this end. President, a fundamental step in order to move closer towards a peaceful, definitive, and comprehensive exit to this conflict is the admission of Palestine as a full member of the United Nations. This request, as we have just witnessed with the vote of 143 member states, is supported by the overwhelming majority of the membership. In echo of the statement by the Permanent Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations, Colombia reiterates that admitting Palestine as a full member of the UN is investing in peace. As a defender of life and of peace, we co-sponsor and support the draft resolution presented by the United Arab Emirates in this session. Colombia urges the Security Council to reconsider its decision on Palestine's request for admission
as a full member of the United Nations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Colombia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan.
Mr. President, thank you for responding to the request of resuming the 10th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. We express our full support to the statements of the Arab Group, the OIC, and the Non-Aligned Movement. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, our session today is held as the Security Council failed to adopt the resolution tabled by Algeria on behalf of the Arab world, the Arab group, last month on accepting the bid by Palestine to become a full-fledged member of the United Nations. And in light of the fact that Israel continues to disregard international norms, humanitarian, moral, legal principles, and values. Israel's occupation army has been committing the worst massacres in the Gaza Strip. They claim the lives of 35,000 martyrs, most of them women and children, let alone tens of thousands of injured, those who went missing, those who had to leave their homes, and those who have been orphaned. Mr. President, my country today voted in favor of the resolution tabled by the brotherly UAE as chair of the Arab group this month. We voted in favor of this resolution as we firmly believe, historically have believed, in the right of the state of Palestine to a full membership in the United Nations. We believe in the centrality of the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, along the borders of the 4th of June 1967, according to international resolutions, the Arab Peace Initiative, and the two-state solution. The overwhelming majority of members of the United Nations have voted in favor of this resolution. This reflects clearly the overwhelming support of the international community to the Palestinian right to full membership in the United Nations, and the support of the international community to the rights of the Palestinian people to freedom, to establishing a state, and to self-determination. It is also a clear message to Israel that no matter how much it tries, no matter how much it destroys and kills and oppresses and persists in its arrogance, its injustice, its aggression on the Palestinian people, it would not distinguish the fire of justice. It will not defeat the will of the Palestinian people. Palestine lives on despite the naysayers. Israel is not going to be able to challenge international support despite of its attempt to mislead, to falsify history, despite its attempts to disseminate a narrative that is flawed, that is completely false, its attempts to erase the culture and the Palestinian identity. Mr. President, we have to work to stop the current crimes in Gaza. The Security Council and the international community must act now to stop Israel from invading and attacking Rafah. 1.4 million Palestinians have sought refuge in Rafah as a result of the continued Israeli war for 7 months now, the Israeli war on Gaza. We warn that the attack on Rafah would inevitably lead to the commission of more massacres against innocent civilians, and it portends a spillover of this conflict. There are international protests against the crimes by Israel and its destruction of large swathes of land in Gaza, which shows that the plight of the Palestinian people is a moral issue faced by the whole world. The international community cannot continue to disregard Israeli violations of the most basic human values of international humanitarian law and the resolutions of this organization. Pressure must be borne to bear on Israel to ensure accountability of the occupying power Israel. Impunity, or rather accountability, is not merely a slogan when it comes to Israel. It must be held accountable. Mr. President, Israel, at the beginning of this week, has controlled the Rafah crossing and closed it completely and prevented humanitarian aid from entering Rafah. This is to enter Gaza. This is a violation of international law and international humanitarian law, and it's an attempt by Israel to ensure the failure of efforts to reach a ceasefire. It's an attempt to obstruct the delivery of humanitarian aid in a sustainable way, and this is unacceptable, especially in light of the increasing needs. We condemn the actions by extremist Israeli settlers. They attacked Jordanian convoys that were going to the north and the south of the Gaza Strip. We also condemn all attacks by settlers yesterday on UNRWA in the occupied Jerusalem. We call upon the Security Council and the United Nations and the international community to take a clear stance and to stop and condemn and to reject these attacks and to impose the implementation of international law, international humanitarian law, without any biases, without any selectivity. We call upon forcing Israel, the occupying power, to fulfill its legal commitments, meaning protecting aid convoys and UN organizations that are distributing this aid. Israel must be compelled to provide protection to UN facilities and stop any attacks on UNRWA and UNRWA staff, who are playing a very important humanitarian role that is indispensable in providing assistance and basic services to Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories. In conclusion, Mr. President, we completely and categorically reject the barbaric Israeli war against the Palestinian people and attempts to forcibly display Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, or to separate Gaza and the West Bank. It is important to stop this war immediately and to stop the continuation of this war using all means enshrined in the United Nations Charter in case there is a threat of international peace and security. Jordan will continue its support to Palestine and its defiant people. We will make all efforts and do our utmost to end the occupation and so that the sun of freedom will shine on Palestinian territories. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Jordan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Thailand.
Mr. President, Thailand welcomes the convening of the 10th Emergency Special Session of the General Assembly in view of the urgent need to address the various dimensions of the Palestinian question. Thailand reaffirms its unwavering adherence to the UN Charter and international law in its totality. Thailand recognizes the State of Palestine and supports the State of Palestine's aspiration to become a member of the United Nations. Thailand thus voted in favor of and co-sponsored the draft resolution on admission of new members to the UN to demonstrate our commitment to the people of Palestine and to join other member states in sharing sympathy and empathy with the Palestinian cause. We hope that this could translate into a strong political will for the entire United Nations to secure justice for the Palestinian people. Thailand continues to condemn in the strongest terms all forms of violence and attacks on civilians in conflict situations, including capturing and taking them hostage. The military operations in Rafah worsened the already dire humanitarian situation for Palestinians in Gaza. We once again call for an immediate ceasefire. Thailand urges all sides to respect and fulfill their obligations under international humanitarian law and relevant United Nations resolutions. We reiterate the Secretary General's appeal for all sides to, and I quote, show the political courage and spare no effort to secure an agreement now. This is a crucial opportunity that the region and the world cannot afford to miss. Mr. President, Thailand is also deeply concerned over the worsening humanitarian situation in Gaza. Plight of all affected civilians and ongoing escalation of regional conflicts in the Middle East. We continue our plea for the continuation of the provision of humanitarian assistance to those in need in Gaza. Thai nationals have been killed, injured, captured, and held hostage. We remain deeply concerned for the remaining hostages, regardless of their nationalities, and strongly appeal for their immediate release and return, as well as their proper treatment and care pending their release. Therefore, we support ongoing coordinated efforts by concerned parties to secure truth and the release of hostages held in Gaza. We appeal to all sides to seek all avenues possible to resolve the situation and work towards long-term peace through genuine dialogue and diplomacy, with a view to finding a mutually agreed, peaceful solution to the issue, in accordance with the two-state solution, by which the state of Israel and Palestine live side by side in peace and security, within secure and recognized borders, consistent with relevant UNSC resolutions. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Thailand. And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Mr. President, I thank you for convening the special session of the General Assembly to debate on the question of the admission of the State of Palestine as a full member state of the United Nations. Today, General Assembly adopted important resolution admitting Palestine as a full member state of the United Nations and recommending the UN Security Council reconsider this matter favorably. The DPRK delegation has voted in favor of the resolution for admission of new member states of the United Nations. Mr. President, the question of Palestine has been on the agenda of the United Nations for over 60 years, but no progress has been made due to double standard and hypocrisy of the United States toward the Palestine issue. For over 60 years, the United States has consistently maintained one-sided support policy for Israel at the expense of the right of Palestinian people to self-determination and their aspiration for independence with statehood. This one-sided approach had been evidenced in various aspects of the United States foreign policy, including military aid and the exercise of the veto power at the Security Council. Consequently, it has become the main obstacle to resolving Palestine issues. This double standard and biased approach of the United States not only undermine the credibility of the Security Council, but also perpetuate the cycle of the violence, injustice, and illegal behavior of Israel in occupied Palestine territory. One of the most typical examples of this double standard is clearly demonstrated in the situation in Gaza, where genocide against innocent Palestinian people is still being committed. It is imperative for international community to take a concerted action with one voice to ensure that all countries respect and follow the same rules and norms. If double standard and a special rule do not apply in the international relation, the Palestine issue will be smoothly resolved as requested by international community. The only way to realize a two-state solution is to recognize and respect the sovereignty of the Palestine and its right to self-determination. The adoption of the resolution admitting Palestine as a full member state of the United Nations is a critical step toward realizing the vision of the two-state solution, which remains the most visible pathway to lasting peace and stability in the Middle East. Furthermore, granting Palestine a full member state of the United Nations would reaffirm the commitment of the international community to upholding principles of the equality, sovereignty, and the right to self-determination for all peoples. The DPRK delegation strongly supports Palestine's full membership of the United Nations and call upon the Security Council to reconsider favorably this matter in the light of the resolution adopted at this special session of the General Assembly. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Democratic People's Republic of Korea. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Monsieur le
President, Excellencies, dear colleagues. Today, more than ever, we must send a strong signal that we are determined to, whatever it takes, take the path towards peace through restoring a credible political horizon. This is why my country, Belgium, co-sponsored this resolution to resolutely choose action. We have the responsibility to work together to relaunch the peace process. There is no alternative to having two democratic states living side by side in peace within safe, secure and recognized borders. There is no other path other than reconciling Israel's security and the aspirations of the people of Palestine to self-determination. We all know this. We cannot postpone this endlessly either. All efforts here must be supported. All those showing goodwill must be supported. In asking the Security Council to reconsider its position on the full admission of Palestine to the United Nations, our General Assembly has sent a strong message of support to a negotiated resolution between two parties as equals. Our Assembly has underscored its determination to work with a Palestinian Authority that must be our own only legitimate interlocutor. It sends a message of hope to all the victims of this conflict, hope that there is an alternative to violence and to war. Our co-sponsorship shows the constant commitment of Belgium for a just, sustainable and peaceful resolution to the Palestinian question and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, fully respecting international law and based on Security Council resolutions. Today's resolution is not an end in itself. It is, on the other hand, a symbolic milestone to make it indisputable that the only possible path is the path of peace. Of course, other stages will be necessary to ensure that a piece of dialogue can emerge and support its evolution. The international community should continue to bring its weight to bear to support these efforts. Palestine's place is within the concert of nations, with us here. That's the point of history and the most fundamental right of the Palestinian people. It's an essential condition to allow a credible peace process. This conviction that we express today goes hand in hand with the necessary efforts of reform to increase the legitimacy and capacities of governance on the part of the Palestinian Authority. It's in taking this path that we will be able to make a reality a full membership of Palestine within the United Nations. And when the time comes, my country, Belgium, in coordination with its partners, will be able to recognize the state of Palestine. President, Excellencies, dear colleagues, an assault in Rafah would sacrifice all of our hopes of a ceasefire and of seeing hostages released. It would force us to bear witness to a new humanitarian disaster. Every day, this conflict drives back the limit of what is unacceptable. inaction can no longer be an option. Our inaction plays into the hands of the enemies of peace. It means that this intolerable humanitarian situation lasts longer, and that will only benefit terrorist groups such as Hamas and all types of extremists. Belgium reiterates its will to continue to contribute proactively and positively to ensure that peace returns. It's in this context that we reiterate our appeal for an immediate ceasefire, an unconditional release of hostages, and complete and unhindered humanitarian access. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Belgium. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Mr. President, thank you for convening this emergency special session to discuss Palestine's membership of the UN following the failure of Security Council to adopt a resolution on the matter. South Africa aligns with the statement delivered by the Republic of Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. At the outset, South Africa reiterates its support for the full membership of Palestine to the United Nations. We believe that Palestine has met the criteria set out in Article 4 of the UN Charter and should therefore be admitted as a full member of the organization. Mr. President, next week, on the 15th of May, Palestinians will observe Nakba Day. This reminds us of the events 76 years ago when the world stood by and watched while hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forced to flee or were expelled from their homes, villages, and towns. Very few have been able to return and reclaim their heritage and rights. It is regrettable that today, the historical events leading to the establishment of this august organization, which is meant to bring about global peace and security, runs almost concurrently with that of the period of occupation, which began with the Nakba. As we convene in this plenary hall, a war continues to be waged against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and a full-scale military operation announced by Israel is imminent in Rafah, despite caution by the international community of the catastrophic consequences of such an action. We are unfortunately witnessing once again the displacement of Palestinians from their very last refuge in Rafah. They have nowhere else to go. This wretched truth implies that we have again failed the people of Palestine. To date, no meaningful action has been taken to stop the genocidal actions in Gaza, nor have sustained efforts been taken to improve the flow of humanitarian relief and protect civilians. On 26 January 2024 and 28 March 2024, the International Court of Justice issued orders in relation to the right of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip to be protected from all acts within the scope of the Genocide Convention. The court ruled that South Africa's claim that the state of Israel, party to the Genocide Convention, has met the standard of plausibility and ordered inter alia, ordered Israel to take action to prevent and punish genocide, incitement to genocide, and to enable immediate and effective provision of basic services and humanitarian assistance to besieged Gaza. These provisional measures were issued by the court to prevent irreparable and irreversible harm to the rights of Palestinians, pending the court's final decision on the case. Regrettably, Israel has not complied with the court's binding order, but has instead escalated its genocidal acts against the Palestinian people. The time for a permanent ceasefire and a complete halt to offensives is long overdue. Mr. President, it is important to recognize that the application for membership of Palestine to the United Nations is occurring within a context of illegal occupation, which goes against the tenets of international law and the UN Charter. We should recall that despite the adoption of Security Council Resolution 2334, the expansion of settlements activities on illegally occupied land in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, has continued with impunity, which has a direct effect on prospects for attainment of the two-state solutions. The Secretary General noted earlier this year that a lasting end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can only come through a two-state solution. Any refusal to accept the two-state solution by any party must be firmly rejected, and that the denial of the right to statehood would indefinitely prolong the conflict. A one-state solution with huge Palestinian population inside that state without any real sense of freedom, rights, and dignity would be inconceivable. The only way to address the legitimate aspirations of both Israelis and Palestinians is through the two-state formula. We must remain steadfast in our commitment to supporting the just cause for justice and liberation of the people of Palestine. As member states who pledged their commitment to upholding the UN Charter, we have the ultimate responsibility to ensure and protect the inalienable rights of Palestinians. For how long must Palestinians wait for their turn to enjoy the rights that all of our people enjoy? For how long must Palestinians be subjected to discrimination and unjust policies that perpetuate a cycle of structural violence and violations of their human rights? Mr. President, at the very least, the international community needs to make incremental steps towards finding a peaceful political settlement for both Israel and Palestinians. Conferring full recognition to Palestine within the international legal order, conferring international legitimacy, leverage, and bargaining power inherent in recognized statehood would be the first step towards offering both sides a secure and better future. It is necessary to restore a balance that has in recent years tipped over